It's so easy to be negative. Let's be positive because there's a couple of moments I need to bring you. Cory Booker and Maxwell Frost have both been speaking today, Wednesday, the 17th of January 2024. And I think these are two politicians who really always put the passion with the facts, you just believe they have a desire to do what they've been voted and elected into office to do. Make sure the important parts, the important things are discussed and they represent those who've elected them.
Chairman, thank you very much. Truly one of the best experiences of my life was working on this legislation, rolling up sleeves, sitting at tables without cameras around and working with good faith people on both sides of the aisle to do something that was very remarkable. And the accomplishments you laid plain here, and I think it should be celebrated, the success we've made. Democrats and Republicans coming together, a Republican administration who I got to know very well during the process. I think we have this falsehood that often rhetorically is heard here in Washington that somehow Americans are not equally concerned, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, about the safety of their communities. I come from being a mayor of a city which has Republicans, Democrats, independents, where the number one issue was public safety. I'm not sure if anybody here in the Senate, more so than me, perhaps equally, was on the ground in communities fighting for safer neighborhoods. I found out very quickly that the police leadership, from the FBI director to my local beat cops, knew that the solutions to security were not solely law enforcement, that in fact, they felt like they were treating symptoms of a larger problem. And it was a wave of using tools to create safety that clearly were not achieving it, because in the years before I was mayor of my city, we were the greatest incarceration capital, not only of the world, but in all of humanity. The United States of America locked up more people than any other nation or past empire when it comes to just the total gross amount of humanity that was being put into jails and prisons. The United States of America had 1 out of every 4 incarcerated people on the planet Earth. It had 1 out of every 3 incarcerated women on the planet Earth. And yet during that same time, we saw the drug problem in America getting worse. And as a result of over-incarceration, hyper-incarceration, and doing things to people in prison, we saw remarkably high recidivism rates. When I became mayor of the city of Newark, I realized that just helping people coming out of prison, being that the recidivism rates were unconscionably high, could be one of the best strategies. And we started doing a whole bunch of other things to approach this problem. Now, it was particularly acute to me that this was driving racial disparities in our country, because incarceration rates amongst low-income communities and black and brown communities were incredibly higher than in other communities, even though rates of drug use or drug selling were no different between blacks and whites. It led to the unconscionable reality to me that not only were we the incarceration nation, but we incarcerated African Americans at such a high rate that there were more blacks under criminal supervision than all the slaves in 1865. And to look around, when I became mayor in 2006, you started seeing examples coming from red states of people taking a different approach. Texas became a model for prison reform in 2007, when the state allocated funds for drug treatment, mental health, and rehabilitation for incarcerated individuals. The Texas recidivism rate fell, as did violent crime, dramatically. By 2018, Texas had closed 4 prisons, saving Texans $3 billion, and showed that you can lower your prison population and lower crime by focusing on empowering people, creating more beloved communities, and dealing with the healthcare issues and mental health care issues and addiction issues. Red state after red state were showing this. South Carolina passed major sentencing reform in 2010 and saw revocations for parole violations fall 33%, recidivism rates falling below to 13%, and the state's prison population went down 14%, saving taxpayers almost $500 million, and again, crime went down. Georgia, Republican Governor Nathan Deal signed prison reform legislation into law in 2012, and the state had one of the nation's highest incarceration rates, costing over $1 billion a year, but within 3 years of lowering their prison population, Georgia saw their crime dramatically fall. And Georgia also went on to enact juvenile justice reform and other criminal justice reforms that ultimately saw a 3.5% in its overall prison population decline from 2016 to 2012. And so it frustrates me when opportunistically we use issues of fear and understandable concerns about crime to drive wedges between our society, as opposed to looking at the practitioners out there in states and local levels who are actually showing a lot of success. As much as we'd like to think that ideas that were passed in the first step are somehow original, they're not. They came from Republicans and Democrats who just wanted to solve problems. And we didn't do everything that Georgia, South Carolina, and Texas did. We did not do all the innovations coming out of red states. We did some of them, and that's why we called it the First Step Act. And so today we herald a celebration. You and I, Mr. Chairman, have met with a lot of the families that had their liberated people from prison, reclaiming the ideals of our democracy, because the most sacrosanct aspect of our democracy, if you read our founding documents, we were formed for our own safety and security, for the common defense, and we were formed around the ideals of liberty. And so we could continue in this institution pointing fingers, damning and condemning, and adding to a culture of contempt, or we could get back to what ideas are working in states and cities, and how can we at the federal government do practical, common sense things to give strength and support to that. I sat last night with Denver's mayor, who's set remarkable records for eradicating homeless populations in his community. And he openly talked about the Republican business leaders he worked with, finding practical solutions that, hey, had the secondary effect of limiting crime that's caused often in these homelessness encampments. And so I just want to encourage us. One of the best experiences I've had in my decade in the Senate was around this bill, working with people that our side vilifies, from Jared Kushner to Lindsey Graham. And they're working with people that I'm sure I'm not a beloved person in the media circles in which my colleagues on the other side operate. But we just said, let's come together and do what is already working, what evidence-based shows it works, and have the byproduct of lowering crime, lowering recidivism, and doing what this country was called to do, to create more beloved communities. I've gone to the homes of people who were released by this bill. You want to talk about family values? Reunite someone who is over-incarcerated with their children. You want to take about stronger communities? People who are released by this bill are leading nonprofits in some of these communities dedicated to keeping other people out of prison. And so every issue that we sometimes opportunistically use to beat the other side, I promise you, as I sat down with the mayor last night for dinner, local mayors don't care about left or right. As Fiorello LaGuardia said, there's no Republican or Democratic way to fix a pothole. We on this committee could do more to get people access to treatment. We could do more to stop mental health people from committing crimes. We could do more to make our prisons places of empowerment and not compounding trauma. We could do more to help people who are hurting. We could do more in our country. Common sense, bipartisan work to solve problems, as opposed to curse the darkness. And so this is a point of light. I celebrate it. But if this is the first step, let's do more. Let's do more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Booker. It's time for the next step, and I think we should be open.
Floor to Mr. Frost for 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, since Republican politicians have no plan to address the real issues of this country, low wages, high prices, etc., their leaders at the highest levels have dipped into the fascist playbook to blame communities and to blame minorities and to blame immigrants for the issues that Americans are facing. And these days, the more fear you can stoke, the better. I mean, one of my colleagues, Marjorie Taylor Greene, has called immigrants terrorists. And many on the right take their cues from their top leader, former President Donald Trump. From 2015 to just this past Monday night in Iowa, he has used fear and racism to spread false narratives. He said that immigrants are, quote, poisoning the blood of our country, end quote, echoing the same language used by Hitler to describe Jewish people. Mr. Beer, why is it grossly incorrect to paint immigrants as criminals, and why is this rhetoric not only false, but dangerous?
Look, U.S. Census Bureau data is quite clear. Immigrants are about half as likely to be incarcerated in the United States as others. If you look at the illegal immigrant population as we have at the Cato Institute, it's, again, it's about 30% less. And that includes all the people that we're putting in cages just because they're immigrants. So it's not true that they're more likely to end up in our criminal justice system, burdening our courts and our police. And also, if you look at area studies that look at what happens to crime rates when an infusion of immigrants comes in, we've seen during the 1990s, especially when you had this huge wave, far exceeding anything that's happened recently, of immigrants come into major cities. There was this rebirth in the economy in those areas. They started businesses, they rejuvenated the communities, filled vacant housing, and that brought crime rates down as well. So there are multiple mechanisms by which immigrants reduce crime and make for a more secure community.
Of course. Thank you. Mr. Beer, are you familiar with stochastic terrorism? Stochastic terrorism is to provoke random acts of ideological motivated violence that are statistically predictable. Last year, a gunman murdered 23 people and injured another 22 in El Paso, Texas, using the same rhetoric of invasion and the great replacement theory that we hear from Donald Trump and many leaders on the right. Mr. Beer, what's the point of stoking this type of hate towards immigrants?
Look, there's only two reasons why you use the word invasion. The first is you want to justify violence against them. Otherwise, you'd say it's a violation of the law, it's illegal, you want a law enforcement response. Invasion calls for a military violent response to these people. The second reason is to invoke invasion under the constitutional clauses in which that is used. There's two. One, states can respond to an invasion unilaterally. We know what an invasion under the Constitution means. James Madison said an invasion is an act of war. So we know what a real invasion is. We know the difference between people coming to serve us and work for us versus an act of war.
So this language fuels a lot of these hateful, violent acts we've seen.
Oh, absolutely.
So I just hosted a roundtable in my district because my constituents are terrified about the talk that's going on up here. An amazing community leader and pastor, Father Jose, brought up a really good point that migrants don't just want to come here. We told them to come here. And Mr. Beer, the Statue of Liberty, situated next to Ellis Island, an iconic American symbol, reads, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." To my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, let's be honest with immigrants who deserve better than what you're offering them. Don't welcome immigrants if you plan to reject them. If you keep pushing your bigoted H.R. 2 bill, then also pass this bill. I've taken the liberty of drafting it for you. It removes the Statue of Liberty, our largest symbol that tells people to come here. This is who you are, removing the fabric of America. So I want to know which Republican who supports and voted for H.R. 2 will introduce this bill. If you're going to support H.R. 2 and these bigoted measures, the least you can do is not be a damn liar. As Americans, we must reject hypocrisy and lead with love. And as long as Republican officials are more interested in peddling hate, the solutions and to fixing this problem in our immigration system will only get worse. Thank you. I yield back.